a good friend of mine, podcasting colleague, Kenneth Nguyen, host of the Vietnamese Podcast with Kenneth Nguyen. And this podcast has featured a vast stories of Vietnamese people from the diaspora and from Vietnam and from artists, educators, entrepreneurs, actors, and filmmakers. And I will say that I'm a huge fan of his show. Me being a Vietnamese person of descent, I've really appreciated hearing so many very different stories from our communities, whether it's in the US here or across the globe or in the homeland of Vietnam. And, Kenneth is someone that I have an immense respect for. I have been really honored to be on his show. I know that we did a show together with Tracy Nguyen from the Vietnamese Boat People podcast, and then he actually happened to be my guest host of my last show when I was sunsetting the podcast like 2 years ago. And at that time, I was pretty clear at that time that I really did not want to be, doing this. I'm like, I'm done. I'm ready to move on. But now here I am 2 years later. I'm bringing it back in a different capacity. So it feels right to have you on as a guest this time. So thank you so much, Kenneth, for being on my show. And first of all, how have you been doing this year with, 2025 almost concluding?
Thank you so much for having me on, first of all. And Randy, I want to, 2 years ago, even though we did the last one for you, I knew you were going to come back because this is something that, people are giving you their, the information, the experience in their lives. How could you turn that down, right? It's an addiction. And I think, yeah, you might take a 2-year break, but in my heart of hearts, I knew that you would be back at it. And I can't tell you how happy I am that you are back because, you brought up Tracy and the Vietnamese boat people. I think she's closing that out, right?
I think she is, but I know that's her organization itself very much is doing things.
Yeah. And I hope they bring the podcast back or another iteration of it. Some different form would be beautiful to see because I think when you limit it to the Vietnamese boat people, it might be a limited topic. Within 50 years is over, and we can keep talking about it. But I think Tracy and you have a plethora of things to talk about. As the future of the Vietnamese continue to prosper and blossom.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when I left the podcast. I was going into Substack. I wanted to do more writing. I wanted to kind of like feature more BIPOC folks. I wanted to tap into the like BIPOC reading BIPOC authored books, and I was still bringing in the interview component to it, but it was a very different format. Like I was doing more of a Q&A, and I'll be honest with you, that felt very unnatural to me because I realized how much of a conversationalist I am. Like there are times when I felt like I had to move on to the next question, and like I wanted to add more follow-up after follow-up, and I was like, I really couldn't do that. It felt restricting, and I think they're having to deal with a lot of things going on in my life for the past year, and then having to finally step away completely and try to live life. I think that there's a sense of it, like you have to like live life and come back in a different capacity. And I felt very reinvigorated. And I think that is something that really sparked my motivation and my drive to come back and have further discussions. There's a lot that has changed in the podcast game. I know that you've been doing this podcast for several years, and in those several years, and I've experienced this too, that I have seen so many Asian podcasters, Vietnamese podcasters have come in and come out. And to be honest with you, coming back, like now, I don't really know who's doing what, to be honest with you. I feel like most of the people that I knew from the podcasting world have since transformed or left the platform altogether. I'm curious about for you, what has that looked like for the past 2 years as a podcaster and seeing how the podcasting landscape has changed both in the Asian communities, but also across all across all demographics. of
You know, I
podcasters.
I share that sentiment with you. In the last 2 years, I think there's a lot of people who dropped off. There's
Mhm,
and for one reason or another, there's more there's different paths that they can pursue. There's different formats that they can pursue that makes more sense. And I think the statistic is like 9 episodes is sort of like where people
mhm,
land. And but I believe in this. I believe that a lot of people can step off like you
mhm,
and they'll come back. That's
mhm,
fine too. And I
mhm,
think that that's important because then we can gain insight on what you did on your 2 years off, right? We can see the growth of Randy Kim and we can experience that together. So I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it. You want to drop off for 5 years, come back.
mhm,
I think that, anybody who's followed you can see 5 years or 2 years ago, how
mhm,
you left off and now where you are with your thinking. I think it's all beautiful because at the end of the day, it's just a conversation. We're just in
mhm.
conversation with each other. And this happens to be my 6th year now. Like I just started
Wow.
my 6th year, and I don't. I pace myself by taking long breaks. Today I
Mhm,
have five. Yours is number 5. Today I have 5 episodes. But then I won't podcast for like 3 months. I'll do that.
mhm,
So I have enough saved up so I don't get burned out. And that's the way I kind of like roll through this is I avoid burnout by recording a lot in like a week or two and then like letting just free falling for the next 3 months.
Wow,
That's been my
that's a
yeah.
very interesting approach because, like, I think coming back for myself, I have been recording like since the last 2 months. I have been recording quite a bit. I don't record like 5 times a day the way you have been doing. Like that's a little too much for my own social battery. But I used to do seasons. I used to do curations of how I release them, and now I'm more like, look, this is what you're gonna get. This is within my own mission, my own theme, and it's how I have to process. And when I need to step out, I'm gonna step out. And I think that's something that I'm learning to do as a podcaster. And I've been watching your work the last 2 years specifically since I left, and I have seen you evolve to not just interview, different prolific folks in the community, but you've also decided to go further in terms of specific topics such as like the Vietnam War and the implications and the politics that we are afraid to talk about, or that we don't have a lot of knowledge, especially from the millennial Gen Z folks that are not aware of why does our South Vietnamese folks feel this way in the US about current US politics in Vietnam versus how Vietnamese folks feel about it from the diaspora and from the homeland. And I felt like you were taking on some very difficult topics. And I'm very curious about how that got you to that place to start having these very layered conversations with, with I can't remember his name, but I know he's a historian and educator on this. And yeah, what was that coming of age for you to, take on this part?
That's a great question because he is actually the person who kicked this all off. His name is Kevin Pham, and he is a professor out of the University of Amsterdam, and he focuses on Vietnamese political theorists. And he wrote a book that talked about 6 of these like central figures that talk about political theory. Ho Chi Minh is one of them. Nguyen Anh Ninh, Phan Chu Châu, Phan Boi Chinh, and those characters are sort of like the bedrock of the anti-colonial sort of like rise up
Mhm,
of Vietnam, of current day modern Vietnam. So being children of the South, which is me and Kevin Pham, we are direct descendants of the other side of the Vietnamese current government. So as we started to like explore, I started to explore more knowledge about, oh my God, before the American War, the Vietnam War, there was this whole colonial, like Japan was like, in
mhm,
the mix, and France was in the mix, and China was in the mix. All these colonial powers were in the mix. And when you look at it from that point of view, it's like a more of a 30,000-foot view. You could see that the Vietnam War with America was just kind of inevitable. And from the point of going much further back in history to analyze the different things that happened leading up to the Vietnam War, it allowed me a lot more neutrality. And I
Mm-hmm.
think going into it with facts and neutrality, um, there's no backlash. I mean, there's only backlash when you sort of take you go heavy on one side and you
Mm-hmm.
defend one side blindly. But I think Kevin and I are really there to kind of open it up
Mm-hmm.
historically to all the facts, and we talk about the bad sides of both sides. We talk
Mm-hmm.
about the good sides of both sides, and I think we lack that in today's environment with the Trump administration. You
Mm-hmm.
know, maybe, yeah, 99% of the stuff that he's doing is not what we like. But you know, hey, America voted for him, and for better or for worse, we got to live with this for the next, 3.5 more years or
Mm-hmm.
or so, and it's painful as hell. But um, I think it's painful as hell for the South Vietnamese people who landed in America. But
Mm-hmm.
with all pain, it will pass. And what do we do in
Yeah.
the moment of pain? What do we do right now? We
Mm-hmm.
organize, we strategize, we
Mm-hmm.
figure out what we need to do. And I don't think that we need to be loud and fight crazy. We Because
Mm-hmm.
I mean it's not working. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's to your point because when I came back to the podcast, one of the things that I don't want to get involved in doing is rage baiting. Like I want to provide content that, like, yes, I do have my own views that are very obvious and a progressive lens. However, if I'm going to do it, I do it from a place of community. I do it from a place of protection of community. Like, how do we offer information, intercept bad narratives? Because I think one thing that I have noticed in the podcasting landscape is it has this manosphere. There's this, like a lot of the right wing fringe voices, the talking heads that have really been infiltrating the podcast spaces, and it sure played a role in the election. And I felt that it was very important for other voices, especially marginalized voices, whether you're Asian, Black, Latino, Indigenous, LGBTQIA, disabled. Like it was very important to also bring these voices into this platform, and I felt like how do we intercept harmful narratives and also bring the narratives that actually show people that are doing the work so people are not falling into despair. And I think that's something I think about very constantly. So I think like when I hear your podcast, like I think it brought a lot of nuance that I was like afraid to bring up because yes, I do think with the ending of the Vietnam War, like I want to both honor my family's suffering and their trauma from the war and also the forced migration, the forced exodus, and and our community members who have been very traumatized, and knowing that unfortunately our current political system knows how to really weaponize their traumas, and I've seen this a lot with the Cuban communities and so forth. But I think to learn from other, like the North Vietnamese and other folks living in Vietnam now, as technology has become more prevalent and more accessible, I learned that the things that I learned has a lot of nuance. There's no binary to,
Yeah.
North Vietnamese bad, South Vietnamese good people victims, or vice
Yeah.
versa, which, both of them, were victims, colonization happened, there's a whole textural layer of people that were in positions of power that, had different ideas and how they approached um, how what they feel is right in their way, and unfortunately, a lot of people were displaced and killed as a result. So I don't think that there is an easy answer to it. There never is, and I don't think there ever will be. But I do think that what you bring is that let's unpack this a
Yeah.
bit here, and then let's talk about it from a more nuanced perspective, especially as our parents are aging and now passing away, because we are at the 50-year mark. So this is a very critical time of being stewards of their stories and pretty much our stories right now. And how do we focus on it, you know?
Somebody asked me last night at dinner, and they asked me, "What do you mean you're a moderate? Does that mean that you're Republican and Democrat and progressive and conservative?" I'm like, no, I thought about that a lot. It wasn't last night. It was like a few nights ago. I thought about that a lot. And
Mhm,
there's some issues that I
mhm,
live in the right. And then there's
mhm,
issues that I live in the left. However, this is where I consider
mhm,
myself a moderate, is that I want to listen and I want to consume
mhm,
what other people are thinking. That doesn't mean that I'm going to immediately broadcast my thoughts and let you
mhm,
know what I'm thinking,
mhm,
nor am I in it for the fight, right? Like I'm not in it to fight you. I'm still processing my
mhm,
thoughts. I'm still
mhm,
wondering, hey, is that right? Or is that right? Is that on the left? Is that progressive right? And I think my
mhm,
job, my job in the world is to
mhm,
really process this stuff and think about it. And
mhm,
not really, I don't need to make commentary on it. I just need to ask questions
mhm,
that may or may not reflect my stance on certain
mhm,
things. But I tell you, I do lean heavily progressive.
mhm.
Now, liberal is built with its own context, right? Like
Yeah.
there are liberal people that believe what Israel is doing to Gaza
Mhm,
is okay,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
That's a liberal way of thinking, and you could be liberal and think that that's okay. But are you a progressive and you can
mhm,
think that? I don't know if those two things,
yeah.
exist in that sphere. And when it comes to Gaza, for me, just for me, I don't want to get political, but I
Mhm,
have to
yeah.
sometimes. When you're killing that many innocent people,
Mhm,
you have to analyze what the heck is going on with that. The uneven,
mhm,
the imbalance of that
mhm,
is something to really raise the. Now when you go into fiscal sort of like spending, and when you go into like abortion rights and all these
mhm,
things, I pause about those things. And sometimes pro-life for me is something that I think about deeply,
mhm,
because I was raised a deeply believing Catholic,
yeah.
and God, and fetus is human, all of that. But this is where I draw the line. I am not a woman.
Mhm,
I should not be in that conversation. I should
mhm,
not be legislating a woman's body. Women should be making decisions. Women should be having control over they should have agency over their bodies and the
mhm,
way they want to conduct life. And whatever they decide, and they decide as a majority, then we as men should really listen and follow in line with that sort of,
mhm.
that's my logic on everything. Like we have to like
Yeah.
listen to everybody.
Yeah, I do think that this is a very important take the important nuanced conversation that we're having here, because I think when we are thinking of what is moderate, what is liberal, what is progressive, what is right wing, the goalpost keeps moving in a
Yeah.
way, and that's the
Yeah.
thing that we also have to recognize too. What I thought was my moderate positions like 10 years ago is now considered radically progressive all of a sudden. So it's like it's a different way of like, how people are like viewing these issues in real time. So, I think that that's also something to really consider. And I am also like at the beginning of starting the Vietnamese podcast in early 2020, I believe. What was the genesis for you creating it for it, and what were you doing prior to it that kind of led you to this podcast world?
So I came out of USC with the film background. I couldn't major in it because I had transferred in, and you can't get into the film program at USC because it's like the oldest institution in the world about filmmaking, and you have to apply a certain way. You have to submit different types of your portfolio. So by the time I got out, I knew that I wanted to be a film producer. So I started being a production assistant. I was a assistant at a literary agency, and I began to make friends with a lot of Vietnamese directors and producers. And I kind of like grew up with these guys. And I spent so many years in the early years, the first 10 years of my life in film, that I was like, I'm probably the only one qualified at the time to write a biography on every one of these guys because I spent so much time. Not everyone, like not 100%, but like the majority of these guys, I was like really close friends. And I'm like, one day I'm going to be the biographer in that, like that one movie, Almost Famous, where the little kid travels. He's like a teenager and he's traveling as a journalist on these planes with rock stars. And that's how I literally felt that way. And I was like, I want to document all of their stories and the growth of the Vietnamese film industry from America to Vietnam and where it's at today. I was like, I'm going to be that guy. And then so when the podcast form really started to take off 15 years ago, I was like, I really want to do this. But I was like busy and I was afraid of technology. And I still am slightly afraid of technology. But the pandemic came around. And by that time, I had been like 5 years thinking about. So I've been thinking about this for like 11 years, 12 years. Seriously, I was like, I have to do this. And then the pandemic came around and all these kids were on Zoom recording their studies. I was like, if they could do it, I got to be able to do it. And then that's when I launched into it. I started recording 20 or 30 of my close friends in the entertainment industry. And then I broke my leg on a hike. So I recorded 20 or 30 by October. By December, the end of December, I released in January. I remember I released in January 2021, but I'd already recorded like 20, 30 episodes. And then by January 19th, I go on a hike. I break my leg on a hike. I've already released half of those episodes. So 10 is already released and I'm in bed for 12 weeks. And I was like, okay, I'm going to slow release them the next 15. But then I'm researching and I'm like contacting more people. And I'm like building up this library. I was like, this is like a deliberate sign from the universe saying, this is what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. And so I just went all in.
Wow, that is incredible. I mean, it's kind of like, I hate to say, like it had to, like, this injury in a way, like gave you this opportunity. It opened the floodgates for
Yeah.
you to really go into this podcasting world. And what did you discover, like in the first year of being a podcaster, with the audience that you were looking to connect with, and how did they respond? What was the Vietnamese podcasting landscape then to you, and what did you notice that people were not doing that you felt, this is what I have to be doing?
I realized that there were not enough people spotlighting these artists, these creators, these business people, these historians, these academics, politicians. Not enough people were recording them. Not enough people were, it's like not even 1% of like them were getting their stories out. And 6 years later, I feel an even bigger need than I did 6 years ago. I feel like we are amplifying enough. And that's why I'm so happy that you're back, because we need more voices to help amplify and spotlight the members of our community. Because if we don't do it, who else is doing it?
Right.
It's the bottom line. So that's what I've learned. I learned the first year, it's like, oh my God, there's a dearth. There's a huge missing chunk of people being spotlighted, and we don't know who these people are.
Yeah, I think I remember was listening to our episode with Tracy Nguyen. I remember you were upset about Saigoneer like stopping their podcast, and we had talked about people like, oh my gosh, we need them to keep going. This is an opportunity. And I think, what was I was kind of losing my thought there for a moment, but I remember you had talked about like, let's have a seminar, let's have like this conference, like virtual, in person, which I think it could still happen, not to say that it won't, but I think it really shows that there is a need for these stories, because for a long time we have seen stories about Vietnam, the Vietnamese people, done from a white lens, from a Vietnam War mindset that is more from the American side. So how do we push or offer, actually I should say, how do we offer a narrative that actually comes from the people, from the families who have lived through it, from the people who are part of this identity? And I think that is very powerful to have that, because it humanizes us, it humanizes our history, and gives a different perspective that yes, it's not a binary way of thinking. That there's so many different ethnicities in Vietnam. I think that there's so many different political ideologies that are not linear. They're not universal here, and I think this is what really made me realize is that the more I got into podcasting, the more I became very interested in both my Vietnamese and Cambodian history, and it led me to finally go on my solo trip last December, and gosh, I felt so rejuvenated from that trip, and so much to absorb because I know you've been back several times. What has that been like for you to come back the last, I'd say maybe the last 10 years, in terms of what you have seen with Vietnam and what you have been documenting from the Vietnam homeland?
I have a lot of different viewpoints about it because I'm like, if I put on the Vietnamese American hat in Vietnam, it becomes a different perspective. But
Mhm.
if I put on the Vietnamese hat, it's a different perspective. And if I put on like an Anglo sort of white like lens on it, it's a totally different thing. And what I'm learning is like having friends in the multicultural space who sometimes parents are like half Mexican, half Vietnamese, and then with a little splash of Dominican in. We are all immigrants. Even white people are immigrants. That is the funniest thing, right? We are all like imposter syndrome walking around.
Mhm.
So when I get to Vietnam, I have to like let go of thinking that I am Vietnamese American or
Mhm.
Vietnamese or take
Mhm.
off my Anglo-Saxon. It's the weirdest thing. I
Mm.
have to keep like a very open mind about the changes and the developments because for everything that they do, it benefits somebody and it really takes away from somebody. All that development in Tao Ding, District 2, all of like these like French villas. Yeah, I mean, somebody's benefiting from that, but a lot of people are getting hurt and things are being taken away, right? And that's just the equation of society. It's a brutal way of looking at it. My brother's living a great life. He's from here, from the US and LA with me, and he's been there for 21 years. And he's part of the landscape in Vietnam
Mm.
now. And when I go back, I stay with him. It's like going to my second home. I go once or twice a year. It becomes a very regular routine. So if I wear my Vietnamese American kind of like I'm family with family, uh, it's a very different approach. And
Mm.
I blinded to the growth of Vietnam beyond District 7 because that's kind of where my brother stays. And I don't go out and I'm just like a hermit at his house. And I'll go to dinners, but I don't like really go out and rage. And the gradual sort of progression of Vietnam and the skyscrapers, I mean, yeah, you could clock that visually. But in terms of like really getting to know it, you got to really dig deeper to know how sinister the changes can be for one group of people and how abundantly like advantageous it is for another group of people.
Yeah, I remember going to Vietnam the first time in 2009 to Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, whichever you want to spin it as. But like I had went there with my uncle, and this was my first time. I had lived in Korea just a couple months, for a couple months in, and I was very green to the idea of traveling, let alone to a homeland that I really can't speak Vietnamese very well at all. And I remembered like the servers, the taxi cab drivers, they were all like criticizing the fact that I can't speak Vietnamese, and I felt very unwelcome the first time that I went, and and even though I really did like my family hometown, I really enjoyed being away from the city life. I was below the Mekong, was in the Anyang province, and I felt like it's at least some sense of, I don't want to say closure, but at least um, a deeper understanding of my roots. And I didn't go back to Vietnam for another 15 years until very recently. And I decided to go to Hanoi, Northern Province, and Central Vietnam, Hue, Da Nang, and Hoi An. Um, I chose not to do Saigon and or visit family members because when I had also was trying to visit Cambodia, so I was on a short timeline, but also because I didn't want to be I didn't want to be like obligated to family, and I didn't want to be stuck with family. I feel like I need to discover things about myself now that I'm in my 40s, now that I'm in a different space in my life now, because where I was at 25, 26 is very different to this version. So how do I how do I build the kind of relationship that I want to have for myself? And that also meant getting rid of expectations of what going to Vietnam and Cambodia was going to be for me. And because of that, I felt like I came away with a lot more, and it's definitely made me want to tap more into my identities. And I'm very curious about what that has looked like when you visit places like the enemy territory that we're told for so long. I'm curious about visiting other places outside of the hometown.
That's a great question. Really great question. Enemy territory, quote unquote. But I could feel the same way if I go to DC now, right? It's the
Mhm.
same sentiment, right? And a lot of people listening to this might go, "That's unfair. Come on now."
Yeah.
But we choose to label things, and I don't label DC as enemy territory, nor do I label Vietnam's government today as enemy territory. So
Mhm.
let's be clear about that.
Mhm.
I don't I don't dare to say that. Maybe, in honoring the people that died and passed away and displaced, in honoring their legacies,
Mhm.
maybe that's enemy territory for them, but that's not enemy territory for me anymore.
Mhm.
Growing up, it was programmed for you and I, right?
Mhm.
We were programmed to think that. So I drive by Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum with a
Mhm.
very sort of like a neutral feel, right? I try to like check in and see what I'm feeling. Why do I feel this way? But that guy's a hero to like a million people that are,
Mhm.
or 100 million people that are living in Vietnam, but not my hero. But
Mhm.
I could also recognize his contribution to that independence, that country's independence,
Mhm.
right? I can recognize it free and
Mhm.
clear of any moral sort of feeling inside of me, but also not. I can't do that when I think about my dad and my uncles and stuff.
Mhm.
I can't like
Mhm.
let that go because of them. But for me, I mean, it's like I think that's the nuance that I always preach about. It's like we have to be able to kind of identify. We can't take on the enemies of our parents. That's just like
Mhm.
that is draining, man.
Right.
That is like the first order of business when you go to Vietnam is like remove this idea that, these people or this government is your enemy too, because
Mhm.
that's not healthy. That's
Mhm.
never going to be healthy.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, looking at the red flag with the yellow star sometimes is a little uncomfortable, but that's
Mhm.
programming that we have to kind of like we have to identify inside of us. Like, why do we feel that way? Why do we feel? Oh, but now there's a new programming, which is when January 6th happened, you see, the
Mhm.
yellow flag with the three stripes. It's like, wait a minute, that's weird too. That
Mhm.
symbol is that symbols, those symbols are like on 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 the footsteps of our capital, and it's representing something that me, child of the South, I don't align with that. That's like the weirdest thing to have happen
Mhm.
in the modern times for a Vietnamese American.
It is something that I struggle with in terms of like when I went to Hanoi, I had a great time, had a wonderful time. There's friends that I know that live in Hanoi, and this is my reality that I work with here. This is like I don't have the prior history to that I lived through. So I had to get rid of that, and felt that way about Cambodia to some extent. And I think when you walk into these places, like yeah, like I have to drop a lot of those biases that were in my head for so long. But even when I go to like Orange County or San Jose, there's always this weird like I look at the South Vietnamese flag, and I also serve on an association, a Vietnamese association, and there's this weird traumatic response to the flag. It feels like it's anger, 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 and I know I'm not in that place because, and also people younger than us, we're not, this is not our This is not a battle. I think a lot of us instead want to go back to Vietnam to really connect, or to define what Vietnamese being Vietnamese American is like here, like doing our own things, not being so tied heavily to the war and to the ongoing trauma from our parents and grandparents and
Yeah.
what have you. And I know that you have lamented many times at how much you do not want to like, beat the Vietnam War as a drum. Like it's I mean, for me, I feel the same way with that and Khmer Rouge. I get really bogged down by it because I don't want to see myself having that history as an identity marker. It's an experience. It's it's part of the package, but this is just there's so much that we have done since then and where we have evolved to. But I think when you look back in the Vietnamese communities in America, um, what is that feeling? Because I feel like with our parents, there's a lot of resentment that yes, they lost their land. They had to deal with so much, and the South Vietnamese flag is this last reminder. I think it goes both ways because I do see it as a reminder of the pain and past, but there's also pride. It's like, you know what, we're still here. We're still more powerful, or however you want to define it. Um, there's something about that flag that raises a lot of emotions.
And I think as it should, things that we as a community we should honor, we should honor that old flag. Sure, I get it. But we shouldn't ignore that there's another conversation too
Mhm.
we're having right now. The nuances of all of these modern identity sort of um I think there's like a resistance from the younger generation, people who are born here, to kind of ignore, like, I mean, it's just natural tendency for humans to grow out of what, and rebel against what your parents think. And I think
Mhm.
that's be okay. But it's also okay to challenge. I think it's also okay to really question, but I don't think it's okay to disrespect the people who have died and the people
Right.
who have like
Mhm.
suffered. I don't think that's okay.
Mhm.
I don't think that's okay on either side.
Oh, right.
I think when you're attacking either side and laughing at people's dying and loss,
Mhm.
that's when it's not okay.
Mhm.
Um, look, I I I go by this. It's like, and this is the hardest thing to go by. Like, I don't care if you're Christian, I don't care if you're like Muslim, I don't care if you're Jewish, I don't care if you're anything. But if you come to me and you can't practice this idea and show love and kindness, then what good is all these religions, right? What good is
Right.
all these parameters and these doctrines and these canons and these doctorates who write about like your religious text and breaking it down? Like, all that means crap to me if you can't just simply love and be kind to your neighbor, right? That's just like 101, life 101. And if and they're always like, whoever it is like Bible thumpers or like,
Mhm.
Muslim, we live in these like weird extremist views when
Mhm.
all you got to do is ask yourself, pull out the litmus test. Is this love and kindness or is it not? That's all we got to ask. And
Mhm.
typically, if you are, in business, that question can be compromised. If you're in the business of the military and you got to follow orders, that litmus test is, or politics, it's compromised. And then you got people who use the compromise to cloak it with religion and all of that. So there's all these weird concoctions
Mhm.
of symbols like the flag, and we all use that as an excuse. But at the end of the day, do I look at people in Vietnam with love, compassion, kindness? Am
Mhm.
I looking at people in Gaza with love, compassion, kindness? And that is the most important thing. The government and the politicians are up to their funny business, right? We just know
Mhm.
that. So at the end of the day, it's really just about that for me: love, compassion, kindness, and that
Mhm.
itself, it takes maybe several lifetimes to master the black belt, of that practice, to love and to seek that kind of
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah, and I always think about like, how do we deepen compassion, and deepen our empathy. And I think this is something I think about constantly. Yes, do I get angry? Do I, wish horrible things for unredeemable people in my opinion? Yeah, I've done that before, but I'm also like but but there's always this wanting to see people transform themselves to become more open, to be more tender, and to be more vulnerable in that sense. And I think that we have to be okay with our vulnerabilities. And I think that's also a big step to this. I also wonder about um, your audiences, like, with the Vietnamese folks in America, Canada, France, wherever, to Vietnam. What have the audiences, how have they responded to your podcast, especially since you take it from such a full broader angle, because I know that you're not just going from a Vietnamese American perspective, I mean, or a Vietnamese diasporic perspective, but really the fullness of it. What has that been like navigating between so many different worlds?
Great question. A really good question. I think, and this is me showing off. I'm gonna show off, and I'm gonna boast about what I'm about to say.
Mm-hmm.
This is the biggest form of flattery for me, is that people say that my conversations with my guests has been very open
Mm-hmm.
and very fair. And I think that for me is the thing that I'm most proud about with the podcast, is that ability to admit, hey, I'm a little biased in this department right now, or I'm a little bit biased on that side.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm open, and I'm free with that idea that, hey, I got these biases, but when I'm coming to the table to talk with the guest, I gotta let the guests know, hey, I'm biased here, and I know that I'm biased. I know I shouldn't be feeling this way, but this is how I feel, and then we can talk about it, we can open it up. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud of that fact that people all over the world says, like, I don't feel like people come and say, man, you're leaning one way and it shows the hate, right? I think people are saying, man, you're like being very honest. You don't know what you're talking about. Right? If you don't know what you're talking about, you're being very honest about it. And I think that's why we're here. We're here to like
Mm-hmm.
chip away at our ignorance. And I'll bring in this example. I was at a bar the other night with two of my friends, and there was a table of people, and I looked at the table, and my friend made a comment, like a really nice comment, and I made a really negative comment. I won't repeat what that comment is, but I made a really negative comment. And then my friend looked at me and said, now, that's not kind. I'm 50 years old this month, November, and I am still having to check myself with this toxicity, this idea of kindness. Like I said, it's lifetimes of growth, of saying, you know what? My God, I turned to my buddy Daniel and I was like, yo, man, you are right. And I felt the sting of that for days after that. So when I think about the comments or all of these people across the world, Vietnamese people or not, because there's a lot of people who are not Vietnamese that chime in, I realize that the more open and aware of our biases and being honest with it is key. And knowing that, like, things that we say, I mean, personally, like as a public figure, things that I say have a lot of room for growth and improvement. And I think that that has to show, and that has to be something that you kind of have to always put that out there, because it's hard to be perfect. It's impossible to be perfect, and you shouldn't be like aiming for perfection. You should be aiming for authenticity and honesty.
Mm. I also think about you sharing about having imposter syndrome. I know that you have said this to me several times in the past. You're like, whenever I would compliment you, you would feel very embarrassed. You would feel that like,
Yeah.
you know what? No, I mean, I would always get I would always get the responses from you that you're downplaying yourself, and I'm like, dude, Kenneth, I know you're a better interviewer than me, and I say this with full honesty. Not to say that I'm a bad interviewer. Like I do feel like I'm good at what I do, but I'm like, yeah. But I also take a lot of inspiration from your curiosity and your genuineness to really learn, and also being able to have high level conversations from like all aspects of like different sectors, whether it's in entertainment, whether it's in um, education, whether it's in finance. I mean, like I think being a journalist, being a person that does this work, you have to have a level of curiosity. You have to have some knowledge, or at least enough of a knowledge to ask questions. And you don't necessarily have to be the expert in everything. I think this is something that I always have to tell people, like, at least do enough work. At least do enough work so you can ask the right questions,
Yeah.
and that you can get to the heart of the matter and know the work that you want to do and what you want as an outcome. How are you still managing this imposter syndrome that you have been feeling as a podcaster and as a public figure now?
I think that the more reps you do, that eventually gets eroded, the imposter syndrome. Because I'm on my 6th year, starting my 6th year now, and I feel like it has diminished. It has
Good.
diminished because just reviewing the tape in my mind, like, no, man, I am lifting heavy weights, and not heavy weights in terms of like meeting people, and no, the heavy weights of doing this all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly doing it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can't take that away from myself anymore, and I just have to be like very proud of the fact that like I'm hitting the proverbial gym of this all a lot. Like I'm obsessed with it, and I have to challenge myself and say, find somebody else who's more obsessed about this subject than me, and that helps with the imposter syndrome. After 5 years now, it really puts a wet cloth over that fire of imposter syndrome. I'm learning to look around and go, wait, everybody's not there's not everybody's here. You're in the gym. You're the only one in the gym at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're cranking this out. And by the way, I am in the gym every morning at 5. Like that's
Jesus.
sort of like I get up at 4:30, and I'm like in the gym by 5, and I'm just, this is what is required to have that imposter syndrome be chipped away.
Yeah, I'm really glad that it has chipped away tremendously because like for people like you have put in the work. I mean, you could speak very well to it. It's also the quality of guests, the quality of conversations that you're having, and the way you connect with community. I think that's something that we have to remind ourselves. Like, I think being both in identities with Vietnamese and Cambodians especially, there is this idea of humility and that we have to keep downplaying ourselves. And for me, I've had to like, no, I should be taking up space. Now, should I take up
Mhm.
space all the time when it's not necessary? No, of course not. But I think that when I'm doing the
Yeah.
work and it speaks to it, then hell yeah, I will enter in whether I'm invited or not. Like I feel like, yeah, I have something to say about it. I could speak to this work. And I remember when I started, like maybe several months in, and this was during the pandemic, I had interviewed Vietnamese Nguyen, who's a friend of yours as well, and he is a Pulitzer Prize winner of The Sympathizer. He's a commentator. He's an author of several books, and he was my first big guest. And I think Tanha Live was like around that same time too, I believe. But for me, that was like my white whale at the time because I was only several months into it. I had no idea where this podcast was going to go into, and honestly, I felt like massive imposter syndrome because I'm like, here I am, kind of a rookie in this. I don't have the big platform. I don't have like the name recognition or whatever. And I remember trying to catch up with him intellectually because he is a very intense interviewer. Like he's very hyper, he's very energetic in what he does, and he brings so much knowledge and wisdom to his interviews to the point where I'm like, by the time I got done with him, I told a friend, I was like, God, I'm done for the rest of the day. I need to be in a dark room and just take a long nap because I was so exhausted. But I think what I learned during that time was I felt a lot of my people pleasing tendencies really come into
Mm.
play where I felt like I know I'm not as smart as this guest. I'm not as, knowledgeable as this guest. And I would kind of tell myself that, and I guess in some false way of humility. Um, and I felt like I was trying to like cater to way too much. Like, oh, let me try to make sure that everything is in your favor. And I realized that no, this is not how I want to go about my work as time went on. And I think coming back, I noticed that change has happened. Like when I interviewed Vietnam when the second time, I was already feeling like confident and self assured about what I was doing. And let's have a real conversation. And I've had that with a few of my return guests this coming back to this podcast. And there's more assertiveness, there's more curiosity, there's me not pulling any punches.
Yeah.
So, and I think that that's what I've learned. Do you find yourself noticing the changes that you have made over the years, especially with people pleasing tendencies and this feeling like, oh my gosh, I feel a little intimidated to talk to this guest. I don't know if I can handle it, from both speaking in Vietnamese in the native language and with English speaking Vietnamese folks.
That's not only a good question, but it's a very insightful question because you have to kind of have to live that experience to actually ask questions like that. And I recognize that, and I'm very grateful for that question. And the reason I am is because nobody's ever asked me that before.
Hmm.
And I always think about that experience of getting the door slammed, the door slammed, quote unquote, in your face, saying no. And it's like I have been reaching out to friends of mine who are famous friends and getting no response back, right? That's been going on for years. And then out of the blue, there is a, hey, Ken, can I get on your show, right? That has happened to me so many times.
Mm-hmm.
And for one reason or another, they're busy, they're shooting, or they're just not into it, or they're just like, you're not big enough, or they're just like, I've been going through a rough 3-year patch, or I'm going through some legal hell. There's so many different reasons, but I am here now to not ask why. I'm going to knock on the door and I'm going to do my reps. I'm going to show up at the gym at 5 a.m. every morning to knock on the door of my guests. And I'm not going to worry about how I feel. Cause sometimes I get to the gym and I'm like thinking like, oh my God, I'm so tired. But once you start to warm up with like a few, and I use this because I use this analogy a lot in my life now, is that, oh my God, there's days where my body says no more gym. And then I get there and then I'm like, all right, I'll just do a few lightweight sets for the first 10 minutes and I get revved and warmed up. Same thing with this, like this question is, people have their own ideas of what you are, but we can't be bogged down with why they are, because then you're going to realize like, oh my God, some bigger people will reach out and want to be a guest on the show. And they're very humble, but they're like, wait a minute, those people are like knocking on your door to be on your show. And they're bigger than other your friends and their fame. And you're like, this is weird. So my point is, the more you do something like in your field and you just keep doing it over and over and over again, you will find some funny things, some funny patterns. Like bigger names will hit you up and really be sort of like humble about getting on your show, and you're like, well, this is so weird. And then some smaller names will flat out ignore you or deny you, and then they'll see you in public and they're like, oh my God, I just want to let you know, I just felt like an imposter. I couldn't come.
I've had that before too, and even in storytelling before I got on the podcast, like I know like some of these friends for years, and I'm like, I know you have a story to tell.
Yeah.
And I would always hear that I don't have a story to tell. I don't think anybody wants to listen. It's not important enough. And I'm like saying, says who? Who's telling you that?
Yeah.
And I think that's something I try to tell with folks, because there are folks that community members that I've reached out specifically, when I like deep into the podcast. Well, some have said, I don't know if I could be on your show, if I'm good enough to be on your show. And
yeah, it's weird.
And I would tell them, I already know why I want you on my show. And here's what I'll tell you. I feel you have something very important, and this is what I want. This is what I need. And this is what the people need. This is what our communities need. And I know that in my, heart of hearts, I do believe that, yes, I like to work with the idea of, I think this is what people should need. And I don't care if you are a $10 million per movie actor to someone who is just working within the community, working soup kitchens. I don't care. Like, I feel like as long as I feel like it's connecting to something that really hits my mission and my audience, this is important. I don't want to like stray away from it. And actually, some of the better episodes I've had
Yeah.
have been from community, grassroots community folks that no one knows, and I really firmly believe in that. So,
But this is what I do want to say. What I've learned now is this: if you are here to get the big names and blah 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 on, and to boost numbers, and this is not going to work. What you need to, what this is for me, what I've learned is that, oh my God, these people are willing to share their lives with me. I'm here for it. And I feel like it's a privilege to be able. So even if this was not broadcasted to people and nobody listened, if somebody said, hey, here's like 1,000 doors, you can come in and mine for information, and these people are willing to sit and talk with you for 2-3 hours or whatever, have at it. I'm picking that. I'm picking that. And if they're like, oh, we don't want it to be broadcasted and it's just for you. What kind of a privileged life am I leading by having thousands of people allow me to walk into their lives and record their brains and their thoughts and their legacies of their lives within the Vietnamese context? Oh my God, I'm so lucky to like, so I
it's a
look at
gift.
that. It's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like,
if
if the universe is gifting that to me, I will take it. And I don't need the big numbers. I really don't. I mean,
no.
I truck along and I get motivated because people are opening doors and letting me into their minds and their mind space.
And you've done the work. I think you've really showed it. You know, I mean, and it's also being genuine, and people could tell when you're authentic or not. And I have seen people that get so fixated on feeling like they have to get the high big names, and I don't think that makes a podcast like. Otherwise, it's going to be the same boring shit that you hear from other podcasters. And like, I feel like you have to like really stand out in a different way. What is it that you actually offer that other people who have not listened to podcasts would tune into? You know who I've always wanted, and I've told this to people, and I think you know the answer to this. I have been so jealous that you've gotten Ocean Vuong on. I've been trying to get this guy for the last 6 years, and you know, I think I'm kind of like that point where I'm ready to move on. I mean, I think once he got on Oprah, I'm like, you know what, I think I need to move on. But that was like one of my favorite interviews. I don't know how you got him, but yeah,
All right. Can I say something? Yeah. Can I say something about that? It was a fluke, I think, at the time, and I had friends who know him and made the introductions, and I think he was a lot less busy, and he wasn't that big at the not. He was big, but not like he's like massive now. But I think it's like one of those things, because I've come back and asked several times for another interview because he's put out 2 more books since the poem book, and then the other the most recent one. So I've reached out several times to his team, and I don't get him. It's just and I've been to his readings in LA, and we have friends who know him personally and who have been in his life, and still it's an uphill battle. And I think that if I continually think about any one person, it's unhealthy for me, because the doors, like, it was open the first time on Earth We Were Briefly Gorgeous. The door for me then. And then the last 2 books were not. And, I get that. And I understand how that plays out. And then somebody like Vietnamese Nguyen is somebody that I am fortunate enough to go to dinner with a few times a year and see him at all the events. And, he lives near me, and my kids and his kids we'll be out in town and we'll run into each other at the mall. This is, but how many people are like, at that Ocean Vuong level that we can't access? And, I'm blessed. And when I think about that one time I got to interview him, but if that, never happens again, it's a sad thing for me, for sure. I'm not denying that. It's a tough thing to think about. And I'd love to have him on back again. And if I ever talk to him and get him on, I will let him know that it is a lifelong dream that Randy Kim from the Bundy Chronicles wants him back, wants him on the show.
Yeah, because I feel like I
I'll
can
run
have a
into
very
him
good
one
conversation.
day.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, but I'm also
But
like,
don't give up. I say
but
don't
there's,
give up.
but there's also many people that I really want to, bring on, like, indie authors. There's like people that have not reached the surface quite yet, but I really do value their work, and I do see importance in what they're talking about in this day and age. And like, so what do you see yourself doing in the next several months leading with 2026? What does it look like for you in terms of your
Yeah.
project and your podcast?
So I will hopefully do more films. I have a passion, obviously, for producing films and producing more podcast episodes. But the most important thing is this challenge to speak into the camera and I have these monologues. I have these really controversial thoughts, and I really want to get them out there. I started telling you earlier about this idea of Dean Cain signed up to be an ICE agent, right? And I'm like, if he knew people of color and was close to communities of people that were just trying to make a living and just trying to be supporting their families, I don't know if he would do that. I don't know if you would become an ICE agent. I think people are really disconnected from people. And here's the example I want to give. For 35 years, I'd been going to Home Depot every few months to I have a project, a building project, or I have to move a whole factory that would take like a week. And I've done this about 7 or 8 times. But I've also had little projects where I needed to build something and I needed guys to help me put it together, move a house, remodel something. So what ends up happening is I used to, when I first started as a teenager, I would go to the Home Depot and drive and then scan people's faces and workers, day laborers without papers. And I would look at their face and I'd be like, based on your face, you look like you're going to steal something from my house, or you're going to rob me and call people in to rob my factory, right? Those were the thoughts that I was having because we just didn't know, right? And then over the years, I started to develop this sort of like this comfort of picking up day laborers from Home Depot. And within a few minutes, we're joking about like food and eating dog tacos. That's what I am serving them for lunch, and making all these cultural jokes about like who they are. And I speak a little Spanish, so we go back and forth. And then by the end of the day, what I recognize is all of those guys become like brothers to me. And for 35 years, I've been doing that. And in the last maybe 2 years, because of like all of the political stuff, I just started to drop this whole idea of like looking at faces. I'm going to pick up anybody, right? Anybody who's standing out there, the first guy that comes up, I'm just going to pick him up. I take him in. Within 5-10 minutes, we're bantering. We're talking about like funny things. And I'll just jab at them and, joke around. And so what I realize is like we can get close to people fairly quickly if we can recognize they're other human beings. And this whole idea of ICE and this politicization of immigrants and all of that, it's a multifaceted thing. It's a very nuanced thing. One of my political heroes is Barack Obama. He deported more people than any president in the history of the United States. He did a lot of that.
Oh yeah, I used
But
to work in immigration
yeah.
work before, so yeah, I definitely remember that very well.
But how he did it was different from how they're doing it today. So, I mean, there's that nuance. But my point is, I want to talk about that. I want to, come at it. And so I have like 100 of those episodes that I don't have the courage to do. And it's just like me back in 5 years before I started the podcast. I had this idea that I wanted to do it one day. But once I start locking in and I do 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, I think I'm going to have that like, it's like an ancillary thing to the podcast, which is me going off on my rant into the camera. And I want to do that. Like, I really want to do that in 2026. If not now, I want to start now.
I
But
think
I don't
that's
have
great.
the courage to do it.
I think that's great that you're doing, like, capturing these stories that you have like in real life. And I think that you're a conversationalist by nature, and to see you do monologues, especially for your podcast, I think would be awesome to do. Like, when I first got back on my podcast, like I was doing like, my own mono episodes, like the first two, and I
Wow.
hope to do more of that as well. And I used to feel very nervous about going off script and and being able to just talk like without anyone to have a conversation with. And I think being on TikTok, doing like Instagram videos and blah blah blah, that has helped me a lot. And I realized, like, wow, I can really feel very comfortable stepping in.
I read your Substack. So that is what basically I want to do on the video form.
Ooh,
Yeah. So you
nice.
have that courage to put the words out there, and you have that like intestinal fortitude to say, you know what, I'm going to speak my truth. And I haven't reached that point yet. So that's that question that you're saying, what does the future look like? I want to be able to do what you do on Substack in video form. And I just want to
Wow.
like, I really want to live in that space. You inspire me that way.
Oh,
I've
thank
wanted
you.
to do this for 5 years. When I started the podcast, I had this itch to give the monologue, and then I'm seeing you do it with your Substack, and I'm like, I want that. I want to be able to do that in video form.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that we continue to inspire each other, and I'm so glad that you're still doing the podcast and you've never given up. And that's not to shame previous podcasters. I mean, people have their own different direction and ambitions to tap into. I think that's awesome, and I've seen people really evolve because of that. I am so glad that I can listen to you every other day, and just hearing the conversations that are happening in our communities constantly. And I feel like that has only deepened my curiosity about the community.
I think at the end of the day, as funny as this is going to sound, I really do believe it. It sounds hippy dippy, but at the end of the day, we are all like one big organism. We're just one
Mm-hmm.
part of one big, massive petri dish.
Mm-hmm.
We're like existing as one unit. But there's some like on the outer edges of the other side, and we're all over the place in this massive petri dish, but we're all one organism. And I think that a living organism is battling within itself constantly to grow
Mm-hmm.
and to split molecules and cells, and all this growth is happening, and it's happening violently. But
Mm-hmm.
I think in the overall picture, I don't know if the universe will ever stop, but if it ever stopped, we recognize that we're all like part of one big giant organism. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the way I look at life. And there's just no reason to kind of stress out over like the people in the Trump administration doing their thing, and people in the far left doing their thing. And I mean, it's painful to see death and destruction and loss, but at the end of the day, I don't know if focusing on all of that negativity is going to really heal us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really appreciate this conversation, and I'm so glad that I can finally have an interview with you and like learn about the work that you have been doing. I hope that my listeners can check into the Vietnamese podcast with Kenneth Nguyen. It's available on all streaming platforms: YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, and so forth. Please follow the Vietnamese podcast on Instagram. And yeah, any closing remarks that you have?
Randy, I am so happy that you are back in the fold. I'm very inspired by the work that you've done when you took the time off, because it wasn't like you went dark. You just
Mhm.
took up another form. And I think that's a form of growth. And now that you're back, I think even your relaxed style today is very different from 2 years ago, and
Mhm. Oh
it
yeah.
shows tremendous amount of growth. And I'm here for it. And I'm so glad that I'm here today, and that you brought me on. And it's an honor, truly is an honor to be part of
Mhm.
um, your growth and be part of our community together. So I'm very proud of our relationship, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for our friendship, and hope to see you very soon, and we'll talk again.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you so much.
Stay tuned.